most people hear, quantum, and file it under mysticism or marketing. That's a mistake, and it's why many strategies for manifesting fail. To manifest is simply to bring a possibility into actuality. In classical thinking, possibilities are passive. You choose, then you hustle, then something changes. Quantum thinking flips the sequence. Possibilities exist as potential forms, a cloud of probabilities, and observation is the act that transforms a potential into an actual. The critical shift is to see manifestation as an ontological process. Consciousness participates in bringing the world into being rather than only reacting to it. This is not a metaphor. It's a physical claim. Modern quantum theory, especially when interpreted from a consciousness-first perspective, suggests that the wave function describes possibilities, and measurement is the event that selects one of them. Measurement is not necessarily a laboratory device. Any act of observation, any focused, coherent awareness functions as a measurement. When you apply that to life, your attention becomes the instrument that collapses possibilities. But not all attention collapses in the same way. There is sloppy attention, worry-scattered desire and focused, coherent attention, clear intention coupled with allied feeling. The former produces noisy, mixed outcomes. The latter favors a particular branch of possibility and brings it forward. Manifestation isn't magic. Because it has a mechanism, intention forms the probability distribution. Attention functions as the measurement. Emotion and belief shape the amplitude and decoherence properties. What's crucial for anyone who wants results is humility about the process. To treat their subjective life as a lab in which they can experiment. The temptation to reduce manifestation to one-liners ask, believe, receive, misses how these elements must align. You must develop clarity of intention, sustain coherent attention, and remove internal sources of decoherence, contradictory beliefs and emotional turbulence. When you do that, the probability of the preferred possibility increases dramatically. We'll avoid airy language and give concrete steps later. But first understand the essential point: manifesting is not wishful thinking. It is applied metaphysics with measurable outcomes. If you approach it like a scientist of your own life, designing experiments, taking measurements, adjusting variables, you will see reproducible changes. That's the promise and power of quantum manifestation. Once you know how the mind participates in the becoming of the world, you can intentionally shape which possibility becomes real. The revolution isn't spiritual fluff. It's an empirical reconceptualization of what observer means. In standard textbooks, we learn the observer effect as an oddity of measuring tiny particles. In practice, modern experiments demonstrate that what is being observed, the act of observation, cannot be separated from the phenomenon being observed. This compels a radical but defensible claim: consciousness is not an epiphenomenon of matter. Instead, consciousness is foundational. It is the substrate within which matter emerges. What does that imply for you? It implies that your attention is not a passive flashlight illuminating a pre-existing stage. It is the constructor of the stage itself. The observer is not outside the experiment. The observer is the experiment. This reframing means that manifesting is less about changing external conditions and more about tuning the observing instrument, your conscious mind. So the outcome you desire becomes the natural collapsed state. Consciousness has qualities beyond mere noticing. It has intentionality. It can point. It has valence. It feels. And it has coherence. It can be focused. These properties affect how the quantum potentials resolve. When your intentionality is clear and your feeling state coherent, your act of observation has a sharper, less ambiguous measurement operator. In the quantum sense, ambiguity breeds mixed outcomes. Clarity breeds a clean collapse. Importantly, this view does not deny physical causality, it enriches it. Material conditions still matter, but they are downstream from a more primary layer, where consciousness shapes the probability landscape. When you learn to work at that level, directing attention, calibrating emotion, dissolving belief-based noise, you change the upstream conditions in which physical events unfold. That's why two people with the same resources may see different outcomes. Their observational stance, their inner field was different. Now, this is not license for magical thinking. The scientific turnaround here is methodological. Treat your consciousness as measurable, trainable, and predictable. You can cultivate attention with precise practices, measure results in your life, and refine the process. That's how the observer becomes a tool rather than a mystery. And that's how manifestation moves from wishful to reliable. One of the most common misconceptions is that manifestation is always slow. In many teachings, patience is a virtue, and it is, but speed is not metaphysically impossible. The key is realizing that quantum processes are not constrained by the linear, local causality of classical physics. Non-locality tells us that correlations can occur without mediation through the ordinary space, time channels. When you set a coherent intention, you don't need to wait for a chain of external events to realign. You change the probability distribution at the level where those events originate. Think of manifestations like selecting a track from a radio of possibilities. Classical action is the slow manual tuning of the dial through physical steps. Quantum action, when done correctly, selects the track directly. The speed comes from acting at the level where selection happens, your intentional observation. If your observation is sufficiently precise and unambiguous, the transition from potential to actuality can feel instantaneous. But speed depends on coherence. If your internal state is fractured, contradictory desires, fear, unresolved beliefs, then any intended outcome will be one among many active amplitudes. The converse is true. If you achieve emotional and cognitive alignment around a single possibility, you increase its amplitude and shorten the time to collapse. That doesn't mean you bypass physical constraints always. Sometimes external processes require time to match internal shifts. Yet the essential point remains. Many apparent delays are not due to external friction, but due to internal decoherence. There's also a practical lever, the use of non-local intention directed to patterns rather than specifics. Specifics can be too narrow and conflict with broader systemic factors. A pattern-level intention, e.g., I am now in the system that supports thriving work opportunities, gives the field room to instantiate the most probable matching configuration quickly. This is why experienced manifestors report sudden openings that seem to appear out of nowhere. Because once the field aligns, matching possibilities cascade rapidly. So speed is real, measurable, and functional. The recipe: clear intention, sustained coherent attention, emotional resonance, pattern level flexibility. When these are in place, Manifestation is not a slow negotiation. It is an elegant, often rapid selection of a preferred reality. To operate effectively, break the process into three mechanics: intention, the blueprint, attention, the measurement, and collapse, the realized outcome. Each maps onto a function in quantum theory, but is actionable in day-to-day practice. Intention is the mental statement of the possibility you seek to actualize. It is not a vague hope. It is a distinct, well-formed proposition that your consciousness can hold. A strong intention is concise, affirmative, and pointed. Forming intention means articulating what you want and why it matters. The why supplies context and energy. Attention is the sustained, coherent orientation of consciousness toward that intention. Attention isn't just noticing. It is the repeated, undistracted presence that functions as the measurement instrument. Measurement in quantum theory requires coupling between the observer and the observed. In life, this coupling is attention. The quality matters. Scattered attention produces fuzzy measurement. Concentrated attention produces precise measurement. Attention must be emotionally and cognitively anchored. Feelings give weight, beliefs give format. Collapse is the transition from possibility to actuality. This is the outcome, the event in the world that resolves the amplitude into a specific state. Collapse is not solely determined by intention and attention. Physical constraints, social systems, and timing play roles, but those constraints are influenced by the probability landscape your conscious acts shape. In practice, collapse often begins as subtle synchronization. A relevant person thinks of you, a small door opens, timing aligns. These are the physical signatures of collapse. To master the mechanics, treat your practice like an experiment. State an intention, set measurable indicators, apply attention in a disciplined way, daily micro practices, and observe outcomes. Record what changes. Notice the correlation between quality of attention and the speed clarity of collapse. Over time, you'll refine how to form intentions that the field responds to quickly. Importantly, collapse is probabilistic, not guaranteed. That means you must design intentions with a margin for multiple paths and avoid specific rigidity that collides with systemic constraints. Use flexible specificity, exactive enough to train the field, flexible enough to allow feasible paths to realization. This balance prevents wasted attention on impossible specifics and enhances the likelihood of timely collapse. This mechanics model demystifies manifestation. It gives you operational tools, craft good intentions, train focused attention, measure outcomes, and iterate. When you do this reliably, you are no longer hoping for miracles. You are conducting reproducible experiments in living creation. Intention without feeling is like an engine without fuel. Emotions are not irrational add-ons. They are the amplifier that raises the amplitude of a chosen possibility. Neuroscience shows that emotion color codes memory and motivation. Quantum informed practice views emotion as the field, shaping resonance that biases probability. Coherent emotion means the feeling state supports the content of the intention. Gratitude for abundance when aiming for prosperity, calm confidence for health, compassionate anticipation for relationship. Coherence itself is measurable heart rate variability, breath regularity, and the subjective sense of centeredness. Practices such as focused breathing, brief somatic checks, and imagery can move you from a scattered affective state into coherence in minutes. The main mistake people make is that they attempt to think their way into outcomes without aligning the feeling. The result: manifestation grinds along slowly because the field receives contradictory signals. Intention says, yes, but feeling says, not yet, or I don't deserve it. Another powerful lever is emotional rehearsal. Before taking action, rehearse the feeling of having already received the outcome. This is not fantasy. It's simulation that tunes the nervous system to a plausible pattern. The brain-body then behaves in ways congruent with the desired reality, thereby increasing probability through both internal alignment and external signaling. When emotional rehearsal is paired with clear intention and focused attention, the collapse becomes much more likely and often faster. Beware forced positivity. Coherence isn't about denying real feelings, it's about integrating and transmuting them. Acknowledge fear, grief, or doubt, then move through them into a stable, centered feeling aligned with your intention. This integration clears the noise. Emotional clutter is a primary source of decoherence. Finally, gratitude is not merely spiritual rhetoric. Gratitude is a powerful resonant state because it assumes abundance and completion, which biases the field toward possibilities that match those assumptions. Build a short daily routine intention statement: 2-minute breathing, 1-minute emotional rehearsal, 30 seconds of gratitude. This compact protocol aligns emotion and attention with intention and becomes a potent accelerator. Decoherence is a physical term that describes how quantum superpositions degrade into mixtures when a system interacts with its environment. In human terms, decoherence equals internal conflict, mixed beliefs, unresolved narratives, and contradictory desires. When you are internally conflicted, for example, you say, I want abundance, but believe money is corrupting. Your inner field acts like a noisy environment that prevents a clean collapse into the abundance branch. Beliefs operate like boundary conditions on the probability wave. Some beliefs amplify, others cancel. The crucial work is to find the hidden belief operators that are undermining your intentions. These often live in the subconscious and show up as sudden hesitations, avoidance behaviors, or small self-sabotaging acts. The fastest route to speed is not brute force intention, it's targeted belief excavation and repair. Start with honest inventory. When a goal fails to materialize despite sustained practice, ask, what story about myself or the world contradicts this outcome? Make a list, then use experiments. Pick the most likely limiting belief. Design a small action that contradicts it, behavioral counter, evidence, and observe the nervous system's response. Repetition rewires the brain and reduces the decohering influence. Another technique is contextual reframing. Beliefs are often stuck in narrow frames. Reframe the desired outcome as congruent with your values. If money triggers moral anxiety, reframe abundance as capacity to contribute. If health goals trigger fatalism, reframe small wins as experiments. Reframing shifts the boundary conditions and reduces noise. Finally, use incremental fidelity. Don't attempt to dismantle decades of conditioning in one posture. Instead, design commitments that produce consistent congruent actions. A 5-minute morning practice that embodies your belief in abundance. A single act of generous spending that contradicts stinginess. A tiny risk that disproves avoidance. Each commitment reduces decoherence and speeds collapse. Decoherence is the silent thief of speed. Remove it by identifying limiting beliefs, running behavioral experiments, and slowly rewiring the environment of your inner field. Speed follows clarity. People sabotage speed in predictable ways. First, over-focusing on specifics. Micro, managing the how narrows options and fights systemic constraints. Fix. Hold pattern-level goals and let the field supply pathways. Second, premature attachment. Gripping outcomes creates tension that fractures attention. Fix practice, release rituals and timeline flexibility. Third, moralizing desires of thinking. Wanting is selfish, creates internal conflict. Fix. Reframe desire as capacity to serve and contribute. Fourth, ignoring small required actions. Intention must be paired with minimal, consistent behavior. Fix, adopt the microstep rule. One small action daily. Fifth, misreading synchronicities as the final result. Many synchronicities are signs of alignment, not the collapse itself. Fix. Treat synchronicities as data points, not endpoints. Other mistakes are technical doing long. Unfocused visualizations leads to mind wandering. Too little emotional engagement makes practices toothless. Expecting instantaneous miracles breeds discouragement. Correcting these involves discipline shorter, higher fidelity practices, honest logs, and incremental behavioral evidence. Always calibrate to tempo. If external processes require time, use that time to deepen coherence rather than losing patience. Finally, community matters. Surround yourself with people who validate experimentation rather than skepticism that saps resolve. Share logs with a trusted partner, compare results, and iterate together.